Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Hello. Ready to go? Yeah. Well, looking at your face tells you the wrong thing. I mean, the other thing. Okay. First of all, we have Manuel Jimenez Raya from Andalusia, and his presentation is Learner Autonomy and Technology towards learner autonomy in ELT through webcomics 3 cases. Okay? Beginning at, as you can see, I have to go down. Thank you. So it's 7 past, right?
Okay. Good morning, everybody. This quote by Schumann is important because it's one of the arguments that I use to convince some teachers to try to venture into the use and incorporation of new technologies and the implementation of pedagogical autonomy or the use of incorporation of pedagogical autonomy in their classrooms. Now, this webcomics research was part of an European funded project here at webcomics. You can find the web there and some of the material that we produce. And there's a network, active network of over 70 teachers, and there are lesson plans and so on, not just for English or foreign languages, but for many different subjects, right? In fact, I was the only one of the different partners that worked on foreign languages. Now, the project aim was to explore the potential of webcomics to enhance the student learning and curriculum goals. And this, when I was invited, at first I was a little bit suspicious about what I could do and the potential of webcomics in language education. But when I sat more closely, thought a little bit more thoroughly and closely about the potential of webcomics, then after this preliminary analysis, I concluded that they could be framed pedagogically in a more structured way in text-based language learning. Understanding text-based language learning in a broad sense, for those that are familiar with Ramon Rive's framework and distinction between first generation, second generation, and third generation tasks, well, this would allow for either, let's say, a task as such and project work, which is, for Ramon, for instance, second generation and third generation tasks are what most people understand by project work, right? I also felt that the student-generated webcomics and the tools for the development met the demands of effective language learning. I'm going to skip, because of time constraints, all the theoretical analysis about the potential of comics, what they can contribute, the productive and receptive use of comics in language education, right? I'm going to focus on what we did in Granada, basically the productive use of webcomics, that is, learners in the role of creators, right? The comics consortium, we worked on the creation of a new generation of webcomics that takes advantage of the potential of hypermedia. Webcomics belonging to this category incorporate graphically animated characters that talk to each other via balloons, but also through audio files that can be incorporated. So they contain text with hyperlinks to additional resources such as videos, images, sound files, diagrams, photographs, links to websites, and so on. The basic idea is to put students in the role of creators rather than mere receivers of information. Now, I'm going to start briefly reporting on what happened in each of the 3 cases. We approached in Granada several schools, and we finally managed to convince 4 schools actually, but today I'm going to report on 3 schools to try to experiment, to incorporate, and of course, to seduce teachers into pedagogical autonomy, which was also a very important, for me, and probably the most important goal. So the first one, bilingual education, webcomics and project-based learning. The background is this was a private bilingual school just outside Granada, level SO3, that is secondary education, talking about 13, 40 years old, 2 classes, 50 students. In this case, the teacher of English as a foreign language and the ICT teacher worked together. And this was a very interesting cross-curricular cooperation and so on. The period of time was it extended for the second and third terms. When it comes to the foreign language classrooms, to the English lessons, students work on webcomics for 70 sessions. Students also work at home a lot, as they reported in their diaries, and in the ICT class. So, the goals, and these were the goals that the teacher I worked with set for himself or for his students: to develop autonomy in language learning, to cater for students' individual needs, to foster creativity in a natural environment, and to improve their language skills. Right? The theoretical background to project-based learning, I'm not going to go into that, but I'm just going to quote the teacher, what the teacher writes in his diary. The teacher kept a diary, as well as the students. He said, we say this approach so as to balance both formal instruction with learner-centered sessions where the students move ahead on their own. Right. I have identified the last 3 stages in the development of the webcomics. The first one, a PowerPoint presentation with a focus on. This comes from the teacher, a learner agency and ownership, whose webcomic, my webcomic. He wanted to tell the students, to make the students aware of this idea of agency, ownership, and so on, that are essential to this pedagogy, right? Pedagogical approach. Creativity, what is a webcomic? He also wanted to tell them and to make sure that they understood. Ideas to suggest, to even brainstorm ideas for webcomics, and reasons for creating a webcomic. Right. The teacher writes in his diary, at the beginning I gave a PowerPoint presentation, setting out all the options, but at the same time inviting the students to get involved themselves. From choosing the theme of their comic to deciding on evaluation criteria to some extent. This approach can be easy or challenging. It depends on the group of students involved. Even more of a reason why the teacher should be at the center of decision making about the syllabus, as long as this gives the students the opportunity to exploit their participation. Now, these are just for you to see 2 slides just as the teacher used them with the students. I was there in the classroom, and then he gave me a copy of the PowerPoint presentation, and he discussed all these ideas that I have summarized with the students, right? Right. So learners were, after the presentation, the PowerPoint presentation, learners were actually asked whether they wanted to continue, whether they wanted to try and experiment and to prepare to work on the preparation, on the elaboration of webcomic, on the creation. And their positive answer gave rise to a negotiation phase, deadline, use of the English in class, topics, and so on and so on. Teacher told the students that they would work in pairs, not individually, not in groups, and learners were encouraged, and the teacher placed a lot of emphasis on this, encouraged on them to be creative and imaginative, making sure that their webcomics were multimodal. And this is essential. I have skipped, but I would just refer to what David Little says about that we cannot forget about the integration of effective language teaching, pedagogical principles, and principles of pedagogy for autonomy. So we must not lose sight that we have a kind of double-fold aim in language teaching. Now, next, how to use Comic Lab, followed by hands-on experience, and this was a combination of a cooperation, or kind of almost team teaching sometimes, between the 2 teachers, the ICT teacher and the teacher of English. And the English teacher writes in his diary, a very important point to mention in his reflections is just how quickly the normally much more passive students raced ahead and worked independently, while those who were more interactive spent most of this second session just individually browsing and researching for material without any initial plan. Interesting insights. This brings the very important issues about motivation and how pedagogy for autonomy can involve perhaps not 100% of the students, but certainly more students than traditional pedagogies. The teacher explains that they will have to keep a diary, presenting possible formats and purpose, discussing, clarifying the students' questions and so on. Students compare and negotiate ideas for the webcomic books. Learners are given a copy of what I call project planning grid. The project planning grid has as a basic goal, to help the student stay focused on language. Not to lose too much sight, not to focus too much on the technology, on the pictures and so on, and forget about learning your language, practicing the different skills. And it also incorporates the important aspects of learner autonomy, such as setting goals for themselves and even self-assessment at the end of the period. Even preparing the presentation, I will show you an example. Of this project planning grid. Before students move any further on the computer, it is essential that I see they are negotiating an initial outline in their pairs or small groups. Possibly in a classroom without computer access, they need to complete the initial fields of the planning sheet. The teacher needs to explain this requirement and then take a back seat and just monitor unobtrusively. I think this is an example, as I would say, that when a teacher is determined, is relatively easy and it's possible to implement pedagogy for autonomy. Then the second phase is the initial completion of project planning grid in pairs. In fact, this project planning grid is basically trying to encourage learners to monitor the whole process closely. Negotiation with the teacher, topic, deadlines, plan, language work, language support, extra work needed, and so on. Learners complete the script of their project and discuss it with the teacher. Learner diary, of course, to keep the learner diary. So, with the ultimate goal of developing a final project or webcomic, students collaborate on sequential tasks, right, and actively engage in the gathering and processing of information. Teachers there closely monitoring, trying to monitor the process all the time. Work typically extends, and this was an emphasis that we saw constantly on the students' diary and the teachers, and on the days we went to observe the lessons, beyond the walls of the classroom. Students access new information via internet or library research, surveys or interviews, and through the exploration of online resources and various sources of authentic language and culture, opportunities to integrate both language and content learning are provided. And this was also an emphasis of the part of the teacher, something that he stressed very often in his diary. At the stage 3, learners finalize their project planning grid, and of course they work on the final touches, if you want, final moments of their comics, digital comics. The learner diary, there is teacher corrected feedback, and they prepare the presentation and they actually present their webcomics to the class, right? And there's a classroom discussion. Now, regarding the preliminary conclusions, I have just selected, I'm not going to go through all of them, some of the things that the students wrote in their diaries about the things that they learned, and that the teacher also collated in his diary, right? Helping others and being helped, learning specific vocabulary not found in textbooks. Some of them was very specific. I learned to agree, disagree, solving problems as they arose. So students themselves had a very positive perception. And this is now the evaluation of the teacher and the students, incorporating what the students said about this experience. On a scale of 1 to 4, the learners in the project primarily chose 3 in answer to the question how much they had achieved their objectives. They all believed to have collaborated positively in group and pair work and recognized benefits. Many believed that the comic was acceptable for their level of proficiency. The poorest skill practice appears to be listening. Next time, I will be sure to enhance this skill and guide students better to exposure. Well, the teacher himself is learning. All in all, the teacher wrote in his diary, and I have learned more than the students, which is not a bad thing at all, from my perspective. It's not at all. The third generation task has allowed me as a teacher to take a backseat role and focus on learners' individuals' needs and deal with them, something I could not do in the normal language classroom. I feel that the project was worthwhile and positive. and it will definitely make changes and expand, which is again, I think, shows that as a successful story in the implementation of new technologies, in the use and incorporation of new technologies and pedagogical autonomy, right? Now, the second school was a different case. This is primary education, again, another, a different private bilingual school, and I work with sixth form between 11, 12 years old. This was a clear subject, so students were learning science in English, and the period was last term. Now, the teacher set himself to broad goals to enhance motivation for learning and develop positive attitudes towards homework. And why homework? Well, this teacher wanted to try but did not feel confident enough in incorporating it into his mainstream lessons. So I had two kind of options. Either forget about this school and this teacher, and then probably, let me say the way, lose this teacher for our cost, for pedagogical autonomy, or explore what I have been insisting on, this idea that Terry Lam, Flavia Vieira, and myself incorporated in one of the books we produced in the Europal project. There was a framework for teacher and learner autonomy, and is the exploring the space of possibility. That is, every teacher can do something. So I decided I'm not going to give up, so I have to find the space of possibility for this teacher. So after several discussions, we agreed that homework was something to be explored. And there's also this idea that normally, at least in Spain and in some other countries, that homework is not very well, it's not very valued by students. Students don't have a high opinion. And it was also a possibility of exploring more creative, innovative ways of doing homework, right? Or incorporating homework. And of course, the goal of developing learner autonomy. Well, this is about a little bit about the background, but I think I have to skip that. There were a few research questions such as, do webcomics actually enhance motivation for learning and develop positive attitudes? What are the students' perceptions of the experience? Are webcomics valid in a clear context? We used a questionnaire with 5 sections, picture observations, a diary, and of course our observations, the researchers. These are some of the results of the questionnaire, but in general, motivated, here it says, I felt, as I prepared work on the comic, I felt motivated, overwhelmed, challenged, bored, self-confident, lost, and so on. There is, whenever the adjective is negative, there is a clear no on the part of the student. So all these homework, or webcomics as homework has helped me, and everything is positive. Develop, review what I have learned in class, even extend what I learned in class, develop learning strategies, develop my creativity, work on my interests and needs, identify difficulties, be more participative in class. And these students also, 11 years old, wrote their diary, and they said things such as, I found it motivating, funny, and it has helped me, it has been very useful. I have learned to organize myself and to work in groups. I enjoyed it because I like it because you enjoy it, because you can do many things. I would like to do more project work with EduComics. EduComics has been very funny, and mostly I have learned English in an enjoyable way, a motivating way. So, preliminary conclusions from this case study. Webcomics as homework allow for flexibility, differentiated homework, learners find it an enjoyable activity, develop engagement, thus increasing motivation. So some of the research questions are answered. The use of webcomics as homework is viewed not as workbook chores, but as an activity that is comparable or superior in learner engagement to classroom work and value beyond its mere completion. Webcomics are worth also further exploration in a clear context. That is, the initial analysis and this use of webcomics as homework shows that the potential for the incorporation in the classroom is very high or promising. Now, I think, as always, I have to finish, so I have to treat the third case, which was with even younger students, 8 and 9-year-olds, and also with positive results. I can summarize some of the conclusions. ICT can raise students' motivation and lead to changes in classroom roles and organization. Webcomics facilitate the assumption of the role of facilitator, enhance the student engagement and productivity. It helps students develop positive cooperative learning relationships, enabling them to work together, creating presentations and developing social skills such as debating, compromising, negotiating, etc. Now, the overall conclusions. We have found evidence supporting the validity of webcomics in education as a pedagogical strategy to encourage enhanced autonomy, multiliteracy, creativity, learning enjoyment, engagement and motivation, innovation, development of ICT, and the learning of English, I insist, in line with current pedagogical thinking and research. And let me emphasize the last one is that these cases show that it is feasible to bridge the gap between the real and the ideal, that is what is and what should be, by exploring the space of possibility. That is, I can say that or with the teachers managed to successfully, because they were all new, as I said, to pedagogical autonomy and to ICT. So now, if anybody is interested in this CD that we published at the University of Granada, just email me. I will send you a copy. Now, I haven't had time to show a webcomic. They are impressive, but if we have time later on, I can show you just one for you to look at it. See what it looks like.